I do want to get it done, and I'm actually quite close. I'm just struggling to find the oomph to sit down and knock it out.
Yeah. Welcome to Pajamas and Wrenches, the podcast where we share warm fuzzies for your creative well and cool tools for your creative challenges. I'm PJ Gardner-Schweitzer, author of the Horace and Bullwinkle series and The Great Zudini from HarperCollins, and this is my friend and co-host.
I'm Sarah Allen. I am the author of What Stars Are Made of, Breathing Underwater, Nightmare House, and Monster Tree from Macmillan.
And we are here today to share our inspirations, our challenges, and all kinds of good conversation.
Woohoo!
All right. All right. So today it's my turn to share some inspiration. I'm very excited. So I told Sarah a little bit about this earlier. So we're going to talk about it a little bit more now, which is that, so I'm sort of a weirdo, but
That's why we're friends.
So I have done this thing where I am tremendously inspired by beautiful writing, but magical stories with elements of a little bit of the supernatural, right? In particular, books that these are books that have inspired me, and I'm going to tell you about why this is weird afterwards. Life of Pi, The 13th Tale, Night Circus, the Golem and the Genie. These are all books that I have loved, and they have been like a part of my spirit and have inspired me. Like I have some big ideas for these beautiful stories, and these books are the inspiration, but I have never reread them. They have this magic in my memory that I'm afraid I'll go back and read them. And I don't know if this is inspirational. I guess maybe this isn't the best inspiration, but like, so I'm like, it's funny that something can hold such a place, because we had talked about how sometimes you rewatch something or reread something, like you have to reconsume something because it like, right. But for me, sometimes something is so sparkling and spectacular in its first consumption, its first reading, its first viewing, that I can't go back to it. So I'm wondering, because so it's funny to me. I don't know if this happens to you, but I'm looking for magic. I'm always looking for that feeling of magic is real, right? And I remember watching the first Lord of the Rings movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. And I was like full on adult. Like I was like 30 years old, 28 years old, something like that when I saw that movie. And I felt like I felt when I was 8 watching a movie. I was like,
yes,
is real. And I've had that. Now that I reconsumed many times, right? I don't
Lord of the Rings marathon every year.
I love it. I love it. And I mean, for years I reread Harry Potter. Like every summer I would like read all of them. And before a new book came out, I was like, well, you got to reread all of them. You got to have them fresh in your mind, you know? But for some things, there's like a singularness to it that, and I like, I've bought these books too, by the way. Oh, Eleanor Oliphant is Perfectly Fine is another one that I adored that book. And yet, well,
here's Kitty.
like it's got to have their moment
anyway,
too.
yeah.
But so, and I'm wondering, is that anything like, do you have anything like that, Sarah? Or is that, do you think,
So I think I do, but I actually have a question for you first about these. So what do you think so you talked about magic in these stories, and the ones that I have are like Night Circus, like, oh my gosh, I think that book like literally casts spells over whoever reads it. But when you are talking about magic, and the kitty is just going to be part of this conversation now, when you talk about magic, do you mean as part of the plot and the story? Because a lot of these books that you're talking about, it does involve a little touch of magic.
Yes.
And do you think it's the way, like, what is it about the way they incorporate that touch of magic that you think has like maybe stayed with you for so long?
Well, okay, so I think this is okay. So I think it's a little bit of both, and I think sometimes depending on, because like Eleanor Oliphant, there's no magic to it. The
Mhm.
magic was the way it made me feel, right? And
Okay.
so
Uh-huh.
I think there are, but if it's just the way it made me feel, I often like, it's easier to go to a reread of it. Do you know, to go
Mhm.
back
Mhm.
to it because I want to recapture the way I felt. I think I think there's something in the magic where there's a little bit of magic in the story. That's because, fantasy, we don't use it anymore because this is very specific type of literature, which is magical realism, right?
Mhm.
Which actually is very specific to, I think, certain South American writers.
Mhm. Mhm.
But it has that flavor. Like, I think a lot of people wanted to use that term because it's the mixture of the real and the fantastical together.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think it appealed to me, not just emotionally, but intellectually. And so that, once you've consumed a lot of story, it's very hard to be surprised, right? Like if
Right.
you read a lot of mysteries, if you watch a lot of mysteries on TV, often you're like, it's him.
In the first 5 minutes, you're like, they're the bad guy,
Yeah,
and you're
you're like,
usually right.
yeah, right. And I remember when my youngest was little, we would watch Castle together, and I'd be like, "That's going to be the bad guy," and he would be like, "How do you know? That's so amazing!" And I was like, "Oh, baby, it's just age. It's just the story, right?" Um, but I think, and and delight. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's an intellectual delight that is hard to recapture with something because once you know how it ends, once you know the twist or you see the thing, you uh it you can't go back and unknow the magic, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it's like once you know how the trick is done, like
Mhm.
do you ever really enjoy the performance in the same way because you already know what to look for?
Mhm.
Which is funny because I do think I've reread things that had plot twists. I don't know what it is, except I think that it caught me by surprise. And I was like
Mhm.
wholly present in the story in a way that I don't know that I could ever be again
By
because
virtue of the situation, it can't catch you by surprise again
yeah, yeah. Do you know
because
what I
you
mean?
you now you've read it. You've
Yeah,
had that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I definitely recommend all of those books. And I feel like there's more. I mean, I am so funny about it, but I bought the books. I have the books in case I ever feel like I need to
Yeah.
recapture that. Also, just to own the magic, right?
I feel like a future episode we need to do like you need to reread one of these and then we'll talk about and analyze that experience.
Experience for you. Absolutely. I will tell you, yeah, Night Circus was one I just was, and do you know what I keep looking for it in person, or not in person, but in an
Oh,
actual book form because I had it
uh-huh.
on an e-reader.
Uh-huh.
Um, and usually I do not feel the same kind of magic on an e-reader.
It's true. It's the same.
You
Mhm.
know, uh, and that's one where I've been like, I'll look around to find a copy because I'm like, maybe if I had the book in my hand, I would be able to reread it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know it's such an odd thing, but I okay, and I have reread this one, but it's like Holes. The
Yeah.
book Holes by Louis Sachar,
Louis Sacker. Uh-huh.
right? Okay. Holes to me, have we talked about this before? No, it might have been me and another friend.
Maybe.
But where this is to me one of the most perfect books ever written because, right?
Absolutely. It's so meticulously put together like a carved like a puzzle
Yeah.
without any single missing piece. I don't know how he does it.
And I adore stories like that. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Where it's so intricate, but it's so simply written that you don't necessarily realize that you're witnessing this weaving of story. And
Mhm.
I love stories. I love stories that have these beautiful. I also do love stories. So some of these, that's what they have in common. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like with Holes, it was the aha moment, and then
Mhm. Mhm.
another aha moment, and then you're like, oh, look at what he did, and he did that all along. I loved that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I find those books are very magical to me, like where you can, like, where the author's hand is invisible, and yet, like, the author is so brilliant. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, does
Yeah.
that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's, so that for me is that's an inspiration. I was like, these books that create magic and delight,
Yeah.
but then hold a sort of special place. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny the ones that you talk about, because I'm the ones that, like, I sort of have two that have come to mind of a
okay.
similar experience where, well, one is the one that was my obsession as a kid that I haven't read since, and another that I had a quite remarkable experience coming back to it. But the first one, and they're like, the one of them is quite different from yours. So the one that I haven't read since I was a kid is Socks by Beverly Cleary,
Mm.
about the cat. And I don't know why. I think I must have read that book 50 times.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just the heart of it, I guess. I don't know. I loved this cat so much, as I'm, sitting here stroking my cat. The whole story of, like, the cat starting out in, like, a little cardboard box and being the last one picked, and then finally connecting with this human girl. So I don't know that it would be interesting going back to it now as an adult,
Yeah.
wondering if, like, that magic, in a very unmagical, like, mundane, the most, like, everyday kind of magic sense, um would still be there. So that would be an interesting reread for that. I mean, because it's very much, Beverly Cleary captures the childhood voice so perfectly. Like,
Yeah.
she's like
Yeah.
the originator of it, like the original.
Yeah.
Um, but the other one, so I grew up with my best friend down the street. I was really, like, she was, I'm talking like my earliest kind of memories kind of friend. We were neighbors from when I was like 3 to 6 or something like that. And she had this couch in her basement, and we were little enough that we would watch really, really scary movies. And by scary, I mean like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And we would be terrified of the child snatcher, and we would,
Yeah.
like, hide in the cushions.
Yeah.
And for years after I moved away, I had this, like, memory of a movie that we had watched. I, like, could see it in my head. I could, like, remember the feeling of it so strongly, but I couldn't remember what the movie was. And then years later, I watched Labyrinth. And I was like, that's it. And I mean, what movie is more vibes than Labyrinth,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like, it
Yeah.
just stuck with me so strongly. And I have been able to analyze it now as an adult. And there's so many specific things that I can point out that, like, of course I love, like, the idea of moving from the real world to magic, like bringing kind of that magic
Yeah.
uh, into the real world. The idea of uh, kind of a coming of age, figuring out what adulthood is, but that Sarah in Labyrinth also doesn't give up. She doesn't have to give up her whimsy and her,
Yeah.
like, child at the end in order to grow up, and also that her name is Sarah. So all these things, that one was a positive experience going back and, like, oh, this
Yeah.
movie still is powerful to me, and now I can kind of excitingly see why, and, like,
Yeah.
take inspiration from that.
I do think, like, for many of us also, though, as a young person, seeing David Bowie just
Right.
like that, you're like, oh,
Coming
and
of
then
age for
like,
all of us.
you're like, oh wow, yeah. But then as an adult woman, you're like, some very deeply problematic thing talking about this. I'm a little concerned. The funny thing to me about Labyrinth is I used to, first of all, when I was young and, svelte, I kind of looked like that actress. And then
Oh.
also I used to dress up. I mean, as a teenager, I used to dress up and act out stuff in my backyard. So she's like, what, 15 or something
Yeah,
like
like
that?
13 or 14, 15.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this story. And I was like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's 100%. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I think every young woman and probably some gay young men had an awakening watching that movie too, where you're like, oh, something's happening
Well,
here.
it's so funny because there's such a nostalgia factor in that movie for so many of us, but I showed it to a friend who'd never seen it before, and the whole first half of the movie, she was just kind of confused. She was like, what is this? And then we got to the ballroom scene and she was
Yeah.
like, oh. And I was like, there you go.
I love it because that is so, yeah. And then you're like, oh, no, I understand. No, yeah. Oh, that is
I
so funny.
understand.
And I do think though that there is something, because there was a movie that I remember watching as a kid. It had Kurt Russell in it. It's called The Mean Season, and it was a mystery and this. And I've also had a crush on Kurt Russell so as long as I can remember. So I was like, oh, I love this movie, and I kept telling Neil. This was when we were early married, so this is like the late 90s. I was like, no, this is such a good movie. This is such a good movie. We have to watch it. I remember it was so good. So we rented. And I mean, almost immediately, it's not good. Like like there's all kinds of flaws in the logic, all this stuff. And I was like, and just it kept going on. And then shame set on me because I was like, I kept telling him how good this was. And because you're the one that recommended the movie, and now
Yeah.
it's not good.
Yeah.
And so I really, that actually sort of has lingered, to be honest. um, so like now I'm like, remember how you thought that movie was so amazing and then you went back and it wasn't? So sometimes I'm like, yeah, those nostalgia blinders
Yeah.
really are dangerous.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so we've talked about, so I know that's probably a weird thing to be inspired by, but I don't know. I thought
Not
it
at all.
was,
I think that's awesome. I love it.
so, all right. So Sarah, let's talk about like maybe some of the challenges or a challenge you've
Yes.
been facing and what you're doing with it.
Yes. So, my challenge that I'm facing this week is that I'm working on two different projects, which is a challenge in and of itself.
Okay.
But one of these projects is a chapter book,
Okay.
and theoretically, it should be going very, very quickly, and I should be able to whip it out.
Yeah.
Um,
No.
and the second project is an adult novel, and I want to get this chapter book complete first before I let
Mhm.
myself dive in on the adult novel because I want to be able to send it to my agent and get it on submission and all of that good stuff. And since
Yeah.
a chapter book is what, 10,000 words, as opposed to the months and months that this adult novel is going to take me, I want to just get this off my plate. But my heart and my brain keep spinning around this adult novel and all the idea. I keep getting
Yeah.
idea after idea for
Yeah.
this adult novel. But I genuinely also love this chapter book and I do want to get it done. And I'm actually quite close. I'm just struggling to find the oomph to sit down and knock it out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm struggling with this week.
I think this is very, very real. You do know, like, because you have what you're working on and you know I need to finish this, especially because you're close. But
Mhm.
your heart and your creative spirit are like, I've already sort of moved on from this project. Something else
Yeah.
is calling me, right? Uh so, no, wait. So I thought originally you said it was a picture book, but it's actually a chapter book, right?
Yes, this one is a chapter book. I actually have also been working on a picture book that I sent a draft to my agent. So I wanted to get these shorter. I mean, easier is not the right word. Short projects are equally difficult. They just are shorter, so they take less
Yeah.
time. So I wanted to get them done, and this chapter book has been taking me way longer than I wanted to.
I feel you on that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm on I have a project that it does not seem to want to end. And I'm like, but but
Yeah.
I'm working on it. And also it also feels like it in some way is the roadblock to then the project you really want to work on.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you think that the answer or an answer to this scenario is to give yourself permission to work if you're working either like if you're working morning afternoon shift, right? If
Hmm.
you're in
Hmm.
the morning, you work on the project you're actually where your heart and spirit is kind of called, and
Hmm.
you feed that, and then you take a break and you worked in the afternoon on the other project where so that you're getting to do both, but you're not using one as the punishment or the reward, right? Where,
Yeah.
right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I think I haven't really tried that yet. With, day job stuff, it's
Well,
tricky to balance,
yeah,
but I absolutely think just kind of breaking it up schedule wise could
yeah.
totally work. Um, And you know, because I think our brains work in different genres at different parts of the day. So I think that could work really well.
I do. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other thing I've been considering trying is, and we talked about this in the last episode, but bringing my notebook somewhere outside of my apartment and
Hmm.
just sitting down and being like, I'm not leaving this table at the library or this
Hmm.
bench in Epcot for 2 hours. And
Yeah.
I'm going to just write, and it's a pleasant thing. Like I love sitting at the library or sitting at Epcot or whatever. Um, because I really think in some sense, it's just a matter of like butt in the chair,
Yeah.
pants doing the words.
Yeah.
And I think that's a strategy I'm hoping to try this week to kind of knock it out. And
Yeah.
I think also having like that schedule of like not punishing myself by not letting myself work on the adult one or whatever,
Yeah.
I think that works.
No, and I really do think a lot of times it's a mental shift about how we think about things, because I'm actually doing the exact same thing. I mean, the exact
Yeah.
same thing. And I keep telling myself I don't have the right to work on the project that's really calling me.
Yeah.
And so I'm not working on anything, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not
Yeah.
allowing myself to do it. And I actually think the project that is under contract that does need to get done sooner does suffer for me not allowing myself you know what I mean? Like to just enjoy, to write what's at the topmost of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think, yeah, no, I mean, that makes total sense to me. Makes total sense.
And have you been, or in the past, have you done the schedule thing that you recommended? And
Yeah,
like,
look,
how does that work for you?
I have done, well, pre-perimenopause, when I
Yeah.
had a functioning brain that I could organize, I actually would often I would schedule something in the morning and something in the afternoon. And sometimes I
Mhm.
even worked on 3 projects at once, but they had to be
Oh,
different
nice.
types of projects, like so that I could really separate them. Um, I also think the more complex the story, the harder this is to do. So I
Right.
think right, like I have one project that's so big that every time I'm like, I'm going to work on this with at the same time I'm working on something else, my brain's like, I don't think you have enough space for all of that right
Yeah. Yeah.
now. But yeah, I have done it before where I did that. Um, I think I think we get very judgmental about how we operate, and instead of just being like, this system works for me right now, because a strategy or a system may not work forever or for every
Mhm.
project. But if something's working for you right now, it's like the permission to lean into that, rather
Mhm.
than the critical voice that's telling you you shouldn't, right? Or like there's a better way
Mhm.
of doing it or whatever. I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. And I'm really glad that you said that about the complexity of the projects too, because I so feel like half my brain is the kind of writer brain that's like, I'm gonna work on 12 things at once, and they're gonna be in all the genres, and they're gonna blah
Yeah.
blah blah. And then the other half of my brain is like, no, you need to like hyper focus on a singular thing
Yeah.
and like deep dive and like live in that world and like soak yourself in it, or it's not gonna work. And I think I
Yeah.
need to stop thinking of it in such extremes that like
Yeah.
maybe there are projects that like you do kind of have to soak yourself in it for it to like for you to really kind of wrap your brain around it.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
because I do think, especially again, the bigger the story, the more characters
Hmm.
like incorporating all of that, because they have to become real in your head, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you don't always, and sometimes you just need to sit and think about them because you
Hmm.
don't know the plot entirely, or you're not quite sure the character. But if you're thinking about 800 characters at once, right?
Right.
I mean, even if you're just thinking of a dozen at
Yeah.
once,
Yeah.
no one is getting enough attention to get fully formed, right?
Right.
And so, and plots, I think, are the same way, right? Like, so I it's such a struggle though for people who have like you and I, who are like, I like have lots of ideas and we get
Hmm.
excited about them, and you want to dig into all of them, but knowing sometimes you can't. And so
Right.
sometimes it isn't a question of, oh, I'm going to work today or this morning on this and this afternoon, but oh, this week I'm working on this project, and then next week I'll work on the other one, or
Hmm.
today I work on this one, tomorrow, so that I can compartmentalize. Um,
Right.
I think
Right.
when people are able to compartmentalize like that, it's easier to do. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
agree.
I find that my characters just start talking to me. And then I'm like, I can't listen to you right now. I've got something else to do, instead of just listening to them and just typing stuff and being like, all right,
Yeah,
well, okay, I
yeah,
guess that's something. But no, I think there's a really real struggle. Like, I think,
yeah.
I'm glad you brought this up. All right. Well, so now we've talked about so what art do you have for our resource for this?
Yes, I have I think a fun resource today about a very unfun topic, which is why I like it so much. It's a newsletter about publicity and marketing as a writer, but it comes at it from an angle that I've never seen anyone else take, which is coming at it not from a marketer's first perspective, but from a creative's first perspective. So thinking of it in terms of like, I'm an author that's a creative, I'm not a marketer. So using that angle to
Okay.
feel less squidgy and weird about marketing. So it's a newsletter called Attention Economy by the writer Lee Stein. It's Leighstein, and it's a Substack. So it's leestein.substack.com. And what I love about her approach is that she looks at marketing from a creative standpoint. So the prime example on her Instagram, she writes about this in her newsletter. She archived all of her Instagram posts and started her Instagram fresh as a fake employee of the life coaching company from her like spoof novel.
Okay.
So she was like all these like hilarious like over the top um spoof life coach quotes, and she got thousands of followers from it. And I love that because it's her coming at this creatively. And then she had this whole
Yeah.
thing of like where she got fired from this life coaching company and everything. And she had like articles written about her. And I love it because it's her using her storytelling as marketing. So
Yeah.
so often as writers, like what do we do? What can we do except, talk about writing? And that's not reaching people outside of the circle of other writers. But coming at marketing and promotion and all that from a storytelling perspective
Yeah.
is so much more refreshing, I feel like. So Lee Stein's Attention Economy Substack is my highly recommended resource of the day.
Well, I actually got out a notepad when you were like, it's this. And I was like, yep, I need to know.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. That is awesome. Okay. So, and I'll share
You've got our wise words.
our wise words. Um, I will, full disclosure, I did get this off of Pinterest. So the attribution may not be correct, but I think the quote stands. So this is attributed to Eric Fromm, I'm not sure how you say it.
Uh-huh.
Creativity requires the courage to let go of certainty.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Right? I it hit me so hard when I read it because I'm a certainty seeking person, right? I want to know that if I do this, it's going to work out, And I I love it also. I think because I'm a what I would call a plotzer, so I'm half pantser, half plotter.
Mhm,
Probably more pantser than plotter, but
mhm,
and I feel like it's like outlining doesn't work for me. I need
mhm,
to know a few key pieces of information and then I write to that, right? I call it like a destination writer. Like I know
mhm,
where I'm going to get to, and then I need to figure it out from there. And there's something sort of exciting and beautiful to me about writing and then the characters take me somewhere I didn't expect, or
yeah.
all of a sudden I'm talking plot and I was like, usually though it gets a little dark, I'm not gonna lie, it's always like my first drafts are always too much, like whatever the emotion is or whatever the thing you're supposed to focus on, it's just too much. I'm like, okay, got to pull that back because that's dark as hell, or or like too silly for words. um so yeah, so I really like this because, and the other thing is, there is absolutely no certainty in publishing. It's not
Oh,
just creativity, but
not
in
even
this
remotely.
industry, there's no certainty, and seeking it can stop you from the part of it that's the best part, which is the creative part, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So yeah, so again, so the quote was, creativity requires the courage to let go of certainty. And I'm gonna pin that up on my computer because I feel like I picked it this week because I feel like it's what I needed this week.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. That's awesome.
all right.
We're gonna try and juggle projects and let go of certainty this week.
Which is good luck with all of it, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, all right. So that brings us to the end of our regularly scheduled material, and it's wonderful as always to talk with you, Sarah, and to share this with everyone. And we are grateful for everyone who's listening, and we hope to have you come back next time. So take care.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening.